All right, all. Hello and welcome. Did this last time. Let me fix this. I started this on Monday, but Wednesday. Welcome to Wednesday, November 1st, 2023, week 9. Today I'm going to talk about implicit bias and becoming culturally competent. So I've basically decided that we're midway through the semester and I don't find that the textbook is helping me guide you through what I believe you should know for diversity and cultural competency skills. So instead, I'm going to take you through, we've done a lot of looking into all these differences, these cultural variations in early childhood development and child rearing. Now I want us to talk about, now that you're in the schools too, the work that needs to be done towards becoming culturally competent. We started it last week, the week before with defining terms. This week, I want to talk about implicit bias because that is a big part of cultural competence. So here's our agenda. That I thought I had revised. Hold on. We're going to pause the recording. Okay, I wasn't that far off. I just hadn't put the final part. So course updates and reminders, we're going to do a brief review and recap of discrimination in schools, or what that can look like. There's an example I want to show you of something that, well, I'll get to it, but it's an example that is common to us. And then we're going to talk about biases, and really we're going to focus on this difference between overt conscious bias and implicit or unconscious bias, because this is what can really permeate through systems and cause systemic racism, not systemic racism, systems of oppression, which can include systemic racism. But also, in order to build our cultural competence, we need to first understand what our own implicit biases are. Okay? So, as always, I wanted to let you know your weekly expectations, watch the lecture, complete the exit ticket, post to the discussion board. I want to remind you, you have a field assignment, which means you have to do your timesheets, start working on your final reflection, piece by piece. Reflecting each week can be a very important part of this process. And then your teacher evaluation. Because your quizzes for chapters 1 through, I think it was 8, weren't due until the 31st, I kind of took my time posting chapter 10. So chapter 10 will be this week, and then I believe I'm going to have to double up chapters for the rest of the semester, but expect there won't be any more gaps in quiz posting the rest of the semester. And then I'm going to start working on the final exams, which neither are timed. There's one that's going to be more open-ended and about application, and one that's more going to be based on some important parts of the textbook. Because although the text, I don't like that it's basically an early childhood textbook, I adopted it because it's what was used in years prior, and I was working off the syllabus of someone else. And although it's not perfect for this course, it does have a lot of helpful information about cultural variations in child development that I think everyone should be aware of. So be aware of that, but I'm not going to make it too tricky. Plus, I'll try to give you plenty of time. So in any case, it's going to be basically take home. Okay. So just be aware of that. Now let's go to our review and recap. Discrimination. What is happening in schools today? So this video, before it starts, I want to say, though I believe this video is based in the UK, there are very similar issues in the US. In fact, another video I was looking at, though it didn't describe it as well, was talking about a lawsuit that the ACLU was tackling about specifically not just hair discrimination, but one of them was hair discrimination, discrimination against traditional clothing that is related to a specific culture, and something about Native American traditions. But similar things that we see in the US. This one, I learned about very recently and didn't even know, but I think is helpful for everyone to be aware of.
In Britain, it's against the law to discriminate against, harass, or victimise someone because of their race. It's often understood that this means a person should not be discriminated against because of the colour of their skin. However, this also applies to someone's hair or hairstyle if it is associated with their race or ethnicity. Despite this, many children experience unlawful discrimination and harassment at school because of their afro-textured hair. This could result in legal action against their school. It is a serious issue. It may cause children to question their identity and belonging at school, and may have safeguarding implications. For some children and young people, discrimination related to hair might also affect their mental health, well-being, and academic work. If pupils are excluded from school or put into isolation because of their hair, this could affect their academic work because they miss valuable learning time. Schools have a responsibility to protect children against race discrimination. If a school's policy or practice bans certain hairstyles without the possibility for exceptions to be made on racial grounds, this is likely to be unlawful race discrimination. For example, a school in the UK had a policy banning boys from wearing certain hairstyles, including cornrows. The cornrows were worn by a pupil for cultural and family reasons. A court found that the policy was unlawful and indirectly discriminatory. The school would need to change it to avoid breaking the law. Hairstyles that are part of the culture and identity of an ethnic or racial group should be respected. But this isn't just about policy. It is also about how people behave. So, if a member of staff makes unpleasant comments about a pupil's natural afro hairstyle, for example, by referring to it as messy, and the child feels
Sorry about that. Didn't expect that.
insulted or humiliated, this is likely to be unlawful racial harassment, even if the staff member didn't intend to harass the pupil. It's also important for schools to be aware that touching a pupil's hair without permission could be harassment and therefore should not be tolerated.
And it's so interesting because I just heard a story where someone did that to a person of color who had, excuse me, textured hair. And that person with the textured hair was very upset because number one, I can tell you that doesn't happen to me. And it only really happens if someone's hair looks different from your own.
Afro-textured hair requires specific care, maintenance, and styling. Accessories and hairstyle options adopted in all areas of school life, including sports classes and performances, should be suitable for all types of hair, including afro-textured hair. It is good practice for schools to make sure staff and pupils are aware of discrimination and harassment related to afro-textured hair. Schools could foster equality throughout the year by organising a range of activities that include black role models and celebrate afro-textured hair, for example. School leaders could promote a culture which safeguards pupils against race discrimination and provide training for staff on this issue. No child should face discrimination or harassment because of their hair. Visit equalityhumanrights.com and search.
So something else I also heard, this was something I did learn very recently. It was in very recently. It was in 2020, before the pandemic. I was at a conference with a good friend of mine who is Black. And we were on our way to our hotel, and she was telling me, we were talking about what we had to do. And she said, "Yeah, I gotta twist my hair before I go to bed." And I was like, "Really?" She was like, "Yeah, no, I can't wear my hair out at a conference." And I was like, I don't understand. Why not?" And she said, "It's just not done." Which I thought, to me was so very surprising. And I tried, absent-mindedly, stupidly, ignorantly to liken it or make an analogy to my tattoos. And she was like, it's not really the same thing because you are still white and I am still black. And it is still a signal of me being black. And your tattoos are still, you can't distinguish between the fact, you can't discriminate the fact that you are not white. Sorry about that. I had a cough there. Anyways, so she said that, and then we went to conference, and well, sadly, the conference had very few people of color. There was another someone that we both knew, someone who she was friends with. I was kind of close to at that time, also a black woman who I had only ever, and I swear to you, I had only ever seen with her hair out. Not twisted, not, no, really, it was her afro out. And I thought it was cool personally. But at this conference, it was not. It was the first time I had seen her hair twisted. And I was like, this is something that's true to everyone. And there was one person of color there who did not. And the next day, after the opening night, that person showed up with a wrap around their head. And I think it's because they felt like, okay, so I guess this is not something we can do yet. So it's interesting to see this, and it's interesting to hear because I know it is for someone who is white, learning about I guess Afro textured hair has been new to me, and also learning that it hasn't really been socially acceptable to wear your hair out in the way that I'm able to do, right? I don't have to do much with my hair. I put it up and I don't seem to care much about it after that. That's also a privilege. So I just wanted to give you an example, like this is race discrimination because it's based on a trait that is specific to certain races. Let's hope I don't have any more coughing. So let's go to the next slide. So diverse populations, where do they begin? So this is about so we talked about discrimination. Now I want to go back to this concept, to some of the concepts we brought up last week, oppression and systems of oppression, but also privilege. Because this is how, and if you've seen this before, I'm sorry, there have been many variations of this same activity. I've seen many different variations of this video, but they have the same idea. And it is the idea that simply being who you are and your background can alter where you start. So let's watch this one.
If both of your parents were born in this country, take a step forward.
If you have blue or green eyes, take 3 steps forward.
Have you ever travelled overseas? Take a step forward. If both of your parents' first language is English, take a step forward.
This is not fair.
If you've ever been asked, but where are you really from? Take a step back. If you have noticed, most Australians on TV look like you. Take 3 steps forward.
This sucks.
If the Prime Minister of Australia has the same skin colour as you, take 3 steps forward.
So if this is the starting position for everyone's race,
How is my starting position?
how confident are you, Aziza, that you can win, given you're all the way back there, but Rebecca and Aiden, they're all up here?
Firstly, I'm a very slow runner, so I'll definitely lose. And secondly, I'm all the way back here. It doesn't seem fair. Like, most of these questions I get to go forward just because of the way I look. And Alan's all the way at the back, just because people of white skin are more advantaged.
Now everyone has their final positions.
It's pretty clear who has the advantage, but who will win? Ready, set, go!
Bye-bye.
Come on, Alan. You can do it. Over the finish line. You can do it. There's the line. There's the line. All right, come together as a group. Come together as a group. Who won?
James.
James won. The idea that we all learnt there was something called white privilege, that society in Australia gives preferential treatment to people with lighter skin or a certain cultural background, and it really doesn't have much to do with anything they've done. It's purely your cultural background and the colour of your skin that means where you start in life is often really different to those with a different cultural background. So who would like to do the race again?
Me.
Who would like to do the race against the fastest woman in Australia?
So we're gonna stop there because the point is the idea that like they're running the same race, but they're starting at vastly different starting points, right? And that's where one overt discrimination can take overt discrimination, especially from the past, but also think about overt discrimination of hair, making someone feel like their identity is lesser than, can make someone start behind, lower their self-confidence. But also this leads into systems of oppression. And yet people aren't aware that people don't want to admit that this is something that exists, yet it does. So how does that happen? How do we have this privilege that we don't want to admit exists, but clearly it does? Now, yeah, what does running have to do with all of those things? It doesn't. The idea is that these are the types of markers that we know lead to increased success and quality of life, and higher quality of life. And it's just completely unfair when we know so many people start so far below. Our support services, although they exist, are not enough and they're not accessible to everyone so that people can start in a way that allows the race to be fair. Because it's not even people starting at the same line, it's more people who are going to have a challenging time should be ahead of the game. And people who are not should start a little behind the ball. That's what I believe. But the idea being, as it is today, that doesn't exist. As it is today, people who start behind the starting line typically stay at the starting line. All right, so let's get into biases. And specifically, I want to talk about implicit versus explicit bias. So let's talk about what is bias. It has two definitions based on how you use it. It's a noun, which is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way to be considered unfair. And as a verb, it's cause to feel or show inclination or prejudice for or against someone or something. So many years ago, right, there was bias, there was discrimination, but there was bias in favor of white people, right? That's not something anyone will admit, right, these days, but it was very clear years ago. That was explicit bias, attitudes or beliefs we have about a person or a group on a conscious level. If we're allowed to enslave people, then that means we're putting our bias on a conscious level. So, hey, that's what we see. We see that people have these bias towards, feeling comfortable around other white people, so this person of color is left out. So then implicit bias must mean those attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions, but unconsciously. Typically, you don't know. And it's usually a result of this mental categorization. So in the world that you've been growing up in, you're trying to make sense of it. And so you've put people, things, whatever it is, into categories to make sense. Then we grow up in these worlds where we have systems of oppression, where we see that people of color, in many instances, live in lower income neighborhoods, lower income housing or developments. They are in low resource schools. They don't have access to the same health care. Those two pieces together are what lead to implicit bias, where in our attempt to make sense of things, we develop what is unconscious and we begin to actually, without knowing it, we do believe these things, we just won't say it. And this is a great quote, I think, to really encapsulate implicit bias. Like canaries in a gold mine, the unconscious bias in our minds can indicate the potential for devastating outcomes, such as an officer making a split-second decision and killing an unarmed youth. Not really in our field, and for educators, implicit bias can cause us to suspend and expel students more rapidly. And this is the former Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, captured when he highlighted statistics on how Black students, and this has been true for so long, are suspended and expelled at rates 3 times those of white students for lesser offenses. Guess what? That's a reflection of our criminal justice system, or at least the way it has been for many years. The idea that if we're presented with a white student and a student of color who do the same thing, we don't know it, but our bias leads us to believe that the person of color was doing this thing maliciously and the person who is white made a mistake. We've tried to make sense of it, and so we very quickly assign rationales behind why people do certain things, but those are actually based upon stereotypes and assumptions that are not true. So what do we do? Good question. Well, we have to make the unconscious conscious. So there's 2 steps. One is going to be one you do on your own. The first is this. I want you to review your Who Am I discussion board activity. Just quickly remember what you wrote about yourself, who you are, what you see as your identity. Then I want you to write a 2-minute essay answering some or all of these questions. 1, how is my identity shaped? How is my understanding, how is my experience changed over time? 2, how do I feel about this or these, my identity in general? How do I feel about the different parts of my identity? And how would I feel if they were different? So something that I would think about is, if I'm going to go simple, what if I were short? I'm 5'10", I come from a tall family. That's part of my identity. What if I were short? That would be difficult for me because it's unlike my family, but it would also be a change to my identity. And maybe I look at short as something that is a weakness because I see that as such a value to me. What is the level of cultural privilege associated with my identity? How has this impacted my experiences during childhood? So perfect example. I grew up in New Hampshire. I grew up in a white middle-class family. Very clearly that has colored much of my own experiences. What I never realized is because I grew up in such a predominantly white community, I had no idea what types of struggles people who were in more low resource communities experienced. I didn't understand because I didn't see it, and because I had family members who didn't acknowledge it, that there were a lot of people starting in much different situations. I recognize it is my privilege that I lived in a state where going to public school was normal. Where going to public school was actually for most individuals living in that state. Most people I knew, upper class, middle class, lower class, went to the same high school I did. Can I say that about Providence, Rhode Island? Absolutely not. I worked in Providence, and I can tell you for sure that is not a predominantly white school district. I know for certain it's a predominantly Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx school district. That is the large portion of that school, followed by I believe, white and then Black students. That would have given me a much different perspective than what I have now. And who knows, I might have developed this thought that because I was the white person going to this really nice school, that I'm better, that I deserve this. I don't know. It really depends on what your family was like, how your family saw education and saw access to education. But I know for me, I had this privilege of going to quality public schools because that's what was around for the most part when I was growing up. Not charter schools, few private schools, and those private schools were very limited in who they accepted and who I knew went there. Then these last two questions I also want you to think about. What have I been taught to think about myself and others based on my identity? Do I accept others from identities different from my own? Not me own, my own. And then how might certain biases I hold have been shaped by any of the above? And I've talked about some of that. I did possess these biases because I didn't actually see the inequities that existed in other less homogenous or less white areas. So what I want you to do is think about these questions, and we're going to do a 2-minute essay. We've already done this a few times. So open up a Word document. I don't care if it's a notepad, Word document on your OneDrive, which you can do. And start typing answer to any of these questions. Really, the last two are critical because I want you to think about how your identity was shaped and how you might have biases because of that. Okay? So whenever you're ready, go. That's the end. So stop typing, and when you're done, submit to the Blackboard assignments page. So next, this will be so this is the next step in building cultural competence. You have a discussion board assignment. So I have added four different assessment tools to the discussion board. They're all about either your own cultural competence, or they're about the classroom. So the classroom where you are currently placed for your field placement. There's specific questions about that. So complete either one of those. Review your answers and if possible, calculate your score. And then I want you to respond to the prompts because they're really about what are you gathering from this information. This information is what helps us kind of build our own cultural competence plan. So I will complete one too, and I will share it next week. And then we'll talk about what are some of the next steps. What other stuff do we need to do? I have some activities that I have done before with my classes. They're easier in person, but it'll be a fun thing to try and do over Zoom, at least independently. So that's all I have for today. Very simple. So today we kind of wrapped up discrimination by discussing a current issue in schools, hair discrimination. We talked about privilege and how starting lines are different depending on your cultural identity. And then we talked about biases. We talked about explicit or overt bias and what it looks like. But then we also talked about implicit bias, how it is unconscious and can lead to, sadly, the systems of oppression, really. It leads to these unfortunately cyclic oppression that seems to be something we can't get out of. So not too much. I'm sticking to a very specific plan where I'm not giving you as much content, but trying to really build on this. We are going to be culturally competent educators, human service providers, wherever you are going in the human services field. And part of that is doing this work of understanding what implicit, understanding what discrimination looks like, understanding the effects of privilege, and then uncovering our biases and really understanding what are these implicit unconscious biases we hold and how can we start unraveling that. That's all I have for today. So all I want you to do is complete your exit ticket and then you'll be done. All right. Thanks, everybody.